Hi everybody, let me know when you can see and of course indeed hear me out here on the cold streets. Hello Tricia and Ronnie then. Just let me know if you can see me. Hello. Hello Tish, good to see you. Happy New Year one and all. I'll just let you get on board the good ship John. I'll put my gloves on, it is cold here tonight. Yeah, Happy New Year one and all. Hi Janie. It is a balmy 0 degrees here. Yeah, it's not the best, but we'll make the best of it. How's that sound? Hi Liz, thank you very much. That just popped up before we went live. Very generous, thank you very much. Happy New Year, everybody that's coming on. So, what have you on? And basically tonight, I thought in sort of a sort of second half, not a kind of part two, but an accompaniment to the one I did just before Christmas, on Christmas Eve, wasn't it? About the kind of nights leading up to Christmas. I thought I'd do something that reflected on kind of New Year and some traditions. So it's not necessarily part two. If you haven't watched part one, don't worry. But it sort of follows the same thematic pattern of taking us through the 12 days of Christmas to the end of this period of holiday. So, if you can see me and hear me okay, which I'm guessing seems right, then I didn't really know how to start tonight because I thought we'll just go and find somewhere and sort of follow the lights. But I thought that All Saints North Street Church was looking particularly fine and gothic-y this evening, so I thought we'll start here. And we'll have a look at the riverside and walk up, maybe cross the river and head to town and just see what catches our eye. And sort of follow the lights, as you might say, because I don't know what's there, don't know how busy it's going to be, but I wouldn't imagine it's going to be so mad busy, so we can get some good sights in. So I wanted to talk about, or ruminate about New Year traditions, and some of the history really behind it, and just thinking about how we came to mark New Year. And of course, when we say New Year, we're talking about the new calendar year. There's all sorts of years, isn't there? There's a school year for anybody. School if Linda's on, another bit involved in academia. You'd know, thank you very much, Janie. That obviously there's all sorts of years. There's tax years, isn't there? So, but we're talking, of course, about the turn of the calendar year. So, when Thomas Jefferson said, "I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past," he could have been speaking with meaning, kind of imbued about the arrival of the new year, the passage from one year to the next. It's measured by a kind of artificial barrier, isn't it? Man-made boundary. But it's kind of got this deep social resonance at the same time. So obviously, I know it's a couple of nights ago now, or night before, whether we kind of share that moment, or we did, communally, or we were together, there's this draw to us, isn't there, to sort of just simply watch the clock creep onwards towards midnight of the last day of the year, because we know we're sort of witnessing something, aren't we? We're witnessing the passing of something, and the birth of kind of something new. And so in doing so, we're kind of connected with both our past and our future. So the ideas that were being thought of medieval times, we'll touch on them a little bit as we walk on. Is it looking pretty though? So we're on All Saints North Street, so we've got the river behind us. We're going to walk over to the river and have a look at the river lights as we kind of have a wander, sort of up and down the river then into town, I think. And just talk about this. So let's have a wander across towards the river. So across kind of centuries and kind of continents, that boundary, of one year to the next, and bearing in mind, of course, it's at different times, isn't it? So we'll know by lunchtime, New Year's already started in Sydney. So we're not all doing it simultaneously. That's kind of the interesting thing, isn't it, about New Year? But kind of wherever they were, in the world, there tended to be celebrations, and they kind of all of them had this sort of thematic thing in common. It was sort of bound in with the kind of rituals of hope and celebration, obviously tying them, back to the ancient times and harvests and so forth. So, it's not kind of surprising, hoping a new year in is a new year of prosperity. So to kind of understand how New Year traditions came into existence, especially here, and it'll be interesting for those that are on the other side of the Atlantic to what degree these are some of the things you've picked up and taken with you, those that got roots in British and European, because there isn't that much to choose between British and European behaviours at this time. These cultural European forms, or if you've kind of got your own versions. But anyway, we'll kind of work through some of them as we go along. And the riverside's looking rather nice and sparkly, isn't it, and twinkly? So I thought it's a nice place for us to walk over. So in the British Isles, you've got to explore a kind of complex tapestry that's woven from kind of ancient rites, the reforms of the calendar we're going to talk about tonight, sort of bring it all together when New Year is, when it actually is, isn't as simple as you'd imagine. I'm going to put the mini tripod on here, just for a second, so I'll get my gloves out. But also, this more ancient human desire to kind of mark the passage of time, while kind of thinking about the past and looking into the future. So the tradition most associated now, of course, with New Year's Eve, I think most wherever we are, is the singing of Auld Lang Syne. I just wondered if you kind of knew or thought, we'll just talk a bit about that. So where does that come from? Why do we sing it on New Year, and where did it originate? So the phrase translates to old long since, and it means days gone by. The phrase is written in Scots language, and another translation is for the sake of old times. So it's not precise, on its originations, but it goes a long way back into, more of an oral culture than written down. But anyway, so the phrase became popular in Robert Burns' poem Auld Lang Syne, and the kind of lyrics of that broadly as a song lyrics. I think they changed slightly, but more or less you're sort of singing his sort of poem there set to music. But he admitted freely to Burns that it was based on a much older Scottish story that he'd basically been told by this old guy, and as far as he knew, it had never been kind of written down. It was just one of these stories that had gone on. So it's got much deeper roots. But Burns sort of passed it to the Scots National Museum, I think, in the late 18th century, sort of saying, here's this old song. It's never been out, it's never been in print before, but it's I want you to know it's not something I've written. It's just a modern version of it. So the main message of the song is to share a drink and honour things that have passed, remember old friends. We'll move on now, my hands are as cold. And we'll take a cup of kindness for Auld Lang Syne. So it's about filling your glass, which is rather nice, toasting goodwill and friendship. As the year passes and a new one starts, it's an opportunity to kind of celebrate friendship and family and kind of go forward again. So that's kind of as a nice sort of resonance, I think, in where most of us will think about this time of year. Oh God, it's cold. So yeah, it's also really a song that's sort of intentionally kind of bidding sort of farewell, isn't it, to the old year, welcoming the new year, and so at the stroke of midnight, in thinking it's New Year's Eve. So he's going to be marking it. Thank you very much, Natty. It's very kind. So how did it become a New Year song? Well, its popularity grew in Scotland, and then it passed over to Great Britain, and then went across the Atlantic to the US, especially with a chap called Guy Lombardo. I don't know if any of you New Yorkers might have heard of this guy, but he was, became one of the fashionable dance band leaders in the 20s. And obviously every street corner had to have a dance band. His orchestra took to playing it at New Year's Eve shows. And they'd got this because of the Scottish link, because they were actually a band that was based in West Ontario, obviously in Canada. And this was like their sort of country music, as you might say, sort of singing some of these songs. And Auld Lang Syne was one of them. And so he did a sort of version, on the dance band, because it was popular back home in Ontario. Didn't really think anything about it, but sort of introduced it once it went down well. So just, started to use it as part of his regular repertoire. Sorry, what's that? I've lost the gimbal. Dreaded gimbalitis. It's the cold, I would think. Bear with us a second, we'll get that back. So I'll just handle it, there's a table here, so I'll just put this down. So I'll just plug this cable back in. Yeah, sorry about this, I think it's the cold. It's just... Right, just let me know you can still see and hear me. I'll just take a sip of water, just to... Thank you for your gifts, that's been most kind, most appreciated. The sound is now better. Yeah, well, that's because it wasn't plugged in for a second. I had to do the gimbal. So we're good to go now, yeah? Yeah, poor little gimbal. At this time of year, it's tough on a gimbal. Right, can you hear me okay now? it looks like it's going through fine for me, so I'll just wait until I get a thumbs up or something saying, yeah, the sound is working. Jane, you can see and hear me. Sound is fine, Statistician. I think that was probably a bit of a delay, and it's probably working again now. So, yeah, so Guy Lombardo's version is the version now that is played every New Year in wherever it is in New York. Is it Times Square? Is it? I'm not sure. But where they kind of celebrate and they dong the bell, it's his kind of recorded version that they still use. So it's kind of interesting that it's sort of at the heart of this New Yorker, festivity for New Year. You've got this kind of Scots via Western Ontario kind of cowboy country kind of music, Scots origin, kind of filtering through. So that's kind of nice. I like that. But obviously, there's other things that form part of the Scots New Year. The Scots are kind of really associated with New Year, and we'll tell you about that. Tell you about that in a second, as to why that should be. But it's characterised under the name, of course, Hogmanay, which you've probably heard. So we're just going to walk down by the river now, and perhaps we'll go over Scarborough Bridge, 'cause that's nice over there, and then we'll walk down the other side of the river. So I hope you're all well. I'm warmer than I am right now, because it's blooming cold, but it's a pleasure to be with you. So yeah, Hogmanay is the sort of collective name of all the fun stuff that goes on in the celebration of New Year in Scotland, which is the destination. Edinburgh is always the place to be if you don't mind crowds for Hogmanay for New Year. And it seems that a lot of the strands of Hogmanay come from older celebrations, influenced with Norse Yule celebrations or other kind of Gaelic traditions. So it's shot through with ancient ideas, kind of rituals, as you might say, little echoes from the past that just kind of continue through. But the thing is in Scotland is after the Reformation, they got rid of Christmas, which we did here too, as well, under the Puritans. But when we kind of relaxed that and kind of gave up in 1660 and brought back the monarchy because it was boring without Christmas, the Scots didn't. They kind of kept theirs, or kept it out rather. I think it was brought back briefly for a while, but then it was, I think, by the middle of the 17th century, that it sort of permanently gone. And so consequently, excuse me, frog in my throat. New Year became a much bigger deal because it was not seen as good form to celebrate Christmas because they were very hardline Protestants and they thought that Christmas was a Catholic festival. So it was kind of not doing that. But New Year was allowed to grow and grow, so they had like sort of 400-year kind of head start on us on kind of New Year's celebrations. So consequently, it's still far and away. Christmas in Scotland, New Year in Scotland rather. Even the Queen used to go up there, didn't she? If those are kind of interested in the British royal family, every New Year. Or was it between New Year, Sandringham and New Year, wasn't it? But anyway, they'll be in Balmoral around that time of year as well, so they very much patronised by and involved in the royal family. So Scotland was much more focused on New Year consequently, and so lots of these traditions, kind of really got established. So they kind of acted as a guide really, as we've kind of all adopted some of these interesting elements of it. So one of the first ones is first footing, which you may or may not have heard of, and it's the idea that the first person to cross your threshold, your home, for the most part, in the new year, should bring you luck, and it's sort of particularly like a sort of tall, dark, handsome stranger. Apparently, is who you would hope. I don't know where that kind of comes from, but that's sort of considered the sort of A1 grade first footer. So if you can organise yourself a tall, dark, handsome chap to come across your door, and ideally, if you can bring with him some coal to help keep you warm on these evenings, that'd be great, and something else to take the cold out, as you might say, a little nip of something warm. So kind of a nice idea, but where all these kind of tall, dark, handsome men will be lurking is entirely not entirely clear, but hopefully, if that's what you're looking for, you'd have got that yourself. You also got fire festivals. I know Paul, in years gone by, did some stuff around the fire festivals, so some of you will kind of be aware of those. Sort of very sort of symbolic rituals, and again, stuff that has kind of been created fairly recently. When I say fairly recently, it might be sort of even Victorian times, but they're not as far back as they seem. But again, based on these kind of older style, kind of celebrations of pagan celebration styles. So the fire festival's kind of part of that, and you know, and again, it's got a lot of kind of ritualistic kind of behaviour, you know, right up in the Shetlands, you know, kind of burning of Viking boats and everything. And again, it's not there's a continuous line of burning Viking boats, but it's they're evoking that sort of spirit. Interesting, one of the ones up there, the up in Shetland, the burning of the clavvy, which is a strange sort of New Year's thing. It's basically getting, you know, old barrels that are made, you know, like with wood and then tar, and then obviously the hoop metal around them. Those sort of barrels, they carry burning versions of them around. I'm not quite sure. I can't. I should have researched that a bit more, but I know they kind of carry it around until it burns because of the tar. But like on poles, so they walk around with like a lit sort of procession. But that's on January the 11th, and that's because of this 11-day time slip that we have between the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar. But again, more of that to come. Oh God, it's cold. It takes your breath away. So I think we'll just cross over the river, and so you breathe in. You just actually breathe in, and the cold just hits you. God, at least I've got my glove off now as well for holding this. Anyway, so where are we talking about? So yeah, so there's all these kind of ancient elements that kind of you know, form part of Hogmanay, as well as the kind of the usual getting parties and, you know, getting drunk and fireworks and all that kind of stuff. And there's sort of certain things associated as well, of burning of juniper in houses and at cattle pens around kind of New Year, burning torches sort of sometimes carried through the fields, the kind of association of fire and Jupiter kind of midwinter darkness, you know, suggesting a dual role of driving out evil, and in the case of fire, of course, celebrating the light as well. So you kind of got these two elements sort of running through these ideas. So I know this is all a bit sort of non-specific, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of how New Year sort of is, as you might say, how it's perceived. And obviously when it got these timings, because it certainly didn't always start on January the 1st. So I thought we'd not start here rather. We'll come over, have a look at the river, because I think the river is a brilliant metaphor in many respects for New Year, because whilst on the one hand, of course, the river doesn't notice a jot that we've just had changed the year, it just continues on its way. But yet, the very nature of the river represents it, doesn't it? Because if we turn in this direction, right, can't see much of the water, but you know, we've got water that, you know, has come down from the Yorkshire Dales, has been little trinkles, you know, has worked its way down into streams, and it's gone over kind of powerful waterfalls with no one to see apart from the kind of fairy folk. You know, and eventually it's worked down here, and it's going to go out now and be part of an ocean. You know, so it's on its sort of beginnings and endings. I think it exemplifies the river. So I thought we'd talk about it down here. So I've kind of dropped a hint in there in terms of saying that it kind of depends when you decide that New Year actually is, because I think interestingly, it would seem that if we go back to what we call the Celtic people, the pre-Roman period, so York famously, of course, founded by the Romans, but it's known that people have been living here for, you know, a good number of years, centuries, you know, beforehand, from kind of actually archaeological digs that were put in place, or rather were carried out when they were first building this bridge. So they know there was, you know, kind of people living by this kind of waterside. But, you know, all over England, these sort of communities, Celtic ones, that were kind of driven out, or at least driven to the west by the Romans, and that it would seem that rather than seeing the beginning of a calendar year, they would look much more to the seasons. And so we've got the most kind of famous of the Irish influence festivals, which is pronounced in kind of various ways. Let's call it Samhain. It's like Samhain. It's a strange sort of word. But it is basically the pagan version of Halloween. The church kind of nicked it basically, and they made it All Saints' Day, and then of course the day before is All Hallowed, you know, All Hallows Eve, Halloween, and everything. But nonetheless, that's the church kind of rebranding, like they did with Christmas Day, something that's already there. But you know, I'm glad they did. So what's kind of good about stuff that originates from the Celtic people from Ireland is because they kept essentially their Iron Age culture largely unchanged, certainly until well into the medieval period. It was then written about by monks, so we've got kind of really good descriptions, if you like. Do you know what I mean? And it's easier to, you know, get a picture of how people lived and what their belief systems were because of these writings by these monks, albeit a long time later. And it seems that within the mindset of the Celtic people, the year was essentially split in half. There was the light period of summer, harvest, etc. And then there was the dark period. And the celebration of Samhain on October the 31st, November the 1st, is the passageway from the end of the light into the darkness. So it's kind of like, you know, a period of death, because obviously, you know, a lot of things stop growing and then come back in when the period of light comes. So there's actual kind of death, kind of metaphorical death, but it's the darkness as well, isn't it? It's you know, how isolating, you know, kind of that would have been for them. So it was their sort of period of the dark year, and then at the other side in May, they had Beltane, which was the big sort of fire festival, the big spring festival, everything kind of coming back to work. So you've got Samhain on one side and you've got Beltane on the other. So that's what kind of bookends their year. So they're not obviously looking for January the 1st. And that's when lots and lots of, if you dig into Irish folk tales and history tales, particularly of the kind of the magical kings and the warriors and so forth, that's so sort of rich in Irish history, this is when the kind of kings fight the major battles, is at this time of year, and there's kind of contact between, you know, kings and people of the other world, you know, the magical people, or however you want to kind of describe it. So much of the story and mythology is shot through with it being, you know, at this period of time, you know, during Samhain. And that, you know, people believe that fairies would kind of come together and congregate around important sites like kind of Newgrange, and there's kind of variety of sorts of sacred places in Ireland where, you know, people could congregate hoping to catch a glimpse of the fairies. We also know in Wales, if any of you got sort of Welsh heritage, that there was a similar celebrations for this time of year, and I've no idea how you pronounce it in Welsh, but Calan Gaeth is my best guess festival, which was the start of winter, and the previous evening was called Nos Calan Gaeth. Nos, of course, interesting, is Latin, isn't it, for hour? So I don't know if that's it spreads across, but basically the eve of winter. So that there is a similar festival in Wales, you know, using the same kind of date point. So that's kind of interesting. So we can say with reasonable certainty, I think, you know, that Samhain rather than January the 1st kind of marks the Celtic New Year, and if so, kind of signified the end of the harvest, the kind of descent of winter, and this kind of just this idea of a darker, more dangerous part of the year. And we think that was, as I say, pretty much the way it was before the Romans got here. That was, you know, how, if we thought about the world split into two, a light half and a dark half. But it was also that moment, as many people were aware, that they believed that the boundary between this world and the spirit world, the magical world, or the world of life and death, as you might say, you know, or beyond into death, as you might say, that this transition of veil was very, very thin at Halloween. And of course, that's where we get our ideas from Halloween. We've talked about it before. People dressing up because they believe that there are evil spirits afoot and they want to disguise themselves so that they can pass by and not get molested. So you've also then got associated things like communal burnings, you know, bonfires and so forth, and festivals about driving out evil. So rituals kind of being done in that kind of way. So all in all, it's kind of interesting way, you know, that it's whenever it is, whatever date you're talking about, you know, you've very much got this patterns in common of celebrating the arrival of the new year with a bang. So if we're going to come to the modern, I'll just get a sip of water and then we'll talk about January the 1st, how we got there. Hope we're all well. Hope you all hear me okay. It's blessed cold. But are we not entertained? That's the question. So if we're talking about the sort of modern transition to the 1st of December, that doesn't come directly from Samhain. There doesn't seem to be any direct kind of link there. But kind of echoes of it, obviously discerning in some kind of modern traditions again. There's still a kind of focus that we have on change and moments, isn't it? The strike of the midnight, the first person to cross the threshold in the first footing, for some people, the cleansing of the fire or giving symbolic gifts, making resolutions for the future, another one. And these are kind of remnants of a much older worldview that saw time as kind of cyclical, and the thresholds within it as sacred and potential for blessing and for harm. So very much in the habit of doing ritualistic cleans and incantations at certain times of year. It's one of the sort of fascinating elements of, not just to go far back, and certainly once you get away from the wealthiest parts of a country, is how much really they bring in new kind of Christian ideas, but end up just being merged with the old ways as well. So you get these kind of very muddy perspective on what things were sort of meant to be there for. But, kind of things are complex. But what we do know is that by the early medieval period, there was an increasing concentration on New Year's feasts, as in the 1st of January. And in Welsh literature, they found sources in, I think, about 8th and 9th century sort of poetry making references to feasts, and people coming together doing communal singing to celebrate the arrival of the New Year in Wales. So we're coming to the light now, so head to the city centre. But I thought it was a bit nice to start there. I know how busy and noisy it's going to be in the city centre, so I thought just in case it's riotous, probably won't be, we would have a quite contemplatory bit first. So just coming up from the water level to now on the bridge level.
What do you mean? She was trying to get the baby sit.
Who's that? High suicide? I don't know what that was. Something just popped up on my screen now to get rid of. What comes down here? So yeah, they also used to celebrate with a lot of the communal singing, but also male bonding and sports and competitive sports, and wrestling and horse riding, and all these kind of things, which of course, not similar to our kind of Boxing Day type thing here. So that day after, kind of Christmas tradition thing, sports continues to this day, doesn't it? Sports at New Year and sports Boxing Day and stuff. So you've kind of clearly got periods where there's a hinge between Samhain putting in place its traditional pulls, if you like, on the mind, but also a kind of growing new modern world, do you know what I mean, that is imposing calendars and a Christian-based sort of structure. So I think obviously the pressure to submit to this was all too much. And so, of course, when the Romans come, they're in charge. They can they can do as they wish. So the idea of kind of starting January does seem to have started with the Romans. And they celebrate the calendar of January in honour of Janus, who was the two-faced god of gates and beginnings. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. So the calendar came to Britain with the arrival of imperial rule after AD 43. So from that point onwards, that was the main kind of measuring system. But in many respects, it also could have been just like an official veneer that just rubbed alongside the existing kind of calendar that was, of course, very much based on agriculture. So it's not clear when we say this came out of so and so that it means it's universally adopted. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But after the end of the Roman rule, there's plenty of evidence suggesting that communities did retain many of their old traditions. So to a large degree, it's safe to assume that when the Romans up to the left, they took most of the kind of Christianity with them. So again, in that void, pagan cultures flourished. And then, of course, the next people to arrive here are Anglo-Saxons, Northwest European people that came with their own set of pagan beliefs and traditions that were Christian. So, even more kind of embedding, as you might say, at that stage. So consequently, the Roman New Year, as in the Roman New Year, it's going to start 1st January, didn't really supplant the medieval, the Celtic, the old one. It just becomes layered on top of customs. And regionally, there could be quite a lot of variation. Once we sort of became fully Christian, they did embrace the dates. It's like part of a sort of coalition deal almost, really, when you think about it. Politically, you know, how treaties are signed. It's the same then, you know, so it's kind of accepted that, you know, these dates sound will kind of remain in the calendar. There'll still be days off. It'll be time for workers to be able to celebrate and not be abused. But at the same time, it's now going to have a Christian meaning. So, as I say, it becomes All Saints' Day. And of course, before it, All Hallows' Eve, the night before Saints' Day. So it becomes Christianised, but not entirely Orthodox, if that kind of makes sense. But of course, what's interesting with the medieval Christians is they didn't actually use the 1st of January themselves for the beginning of their year. They used, I'll be amazed if anybody knows this. I'll be delighted if anybody knows when it was. I'll just give you a minute to post up if you've got any idea as to when the beginning of the medieval year was. Each and every year, never moved. Not like Easter, it's a fixed date. Anybody knows that, just pop it up. If not, I'll tell you. We'll just have a little walk around the tree, warm our cockles. We did absorb it all. We were little sponges, aren't we, Leslie? But that's why we're like a sort of great mongrel race. I think that's why we're so good at clinging on in there. What's the stuff in our teeth? Pretty, doesn't it? So I'm not seeing anybody popping up in the text, so I'm guessing nobody knows, which is fine. Leslie, if you didn't Google that, then a gold star. If you did Google it, 2 gold stars, because it's initiative and timely. So either way, hats off, glasses raised to Leslie Ram of North London. So yeah, and that the significance of that day was the Annunciation. It was called Ladies' Day. And of course, what that meant was that was the day when, in the Bible, Mary's visited by is it Angel Gabriel? I should brush up on these things, shouldn't I? And told she's going to bear a baby. Whether she actually becomes pregnant that day, I'm not entirely sure, but she's going to have a baby, and she's got some explaining to do. So, I beg your pardon, no, of course, it was the Immaculate Conception, wasn't it? Right. So, consequently, you know, we've now kind of got this story of the 25th of March being the beginnings. And so they make this date, the 25th of March, doesn't move ever from year to year. It doesn't matter if it's a Sunday or whatever. It's the 25th of March. The Feast of Our Lady is the beginning of the year, so consequently all taxes fall due on the following day. So the beginning of our tax year until the 1750s was March the 26th. What a fun fact that is. But I'll tell you why it matters in a minute. So this becomes the start of the medieval year, not January the 1st. So I'll say you've got this in the mix as well. So it's not until the adoption of the Georgian calendar in the 18th century that January the 1st is standardised across the British Isles. And this doesn't happen until 1752. So until then, the UK tax year, as I say, had started on March 26th, day after Lady Day. So this was a problem. In fact, in 1751, which is just, this building was built and completed about 1745, so it's in its early years. Experience what I'm going to tell you. So let's look at the building from that period, because it happened right here, and everywhere else, but everywhere in Britain. So in 1751, Britain and its overseas colonies, including Wales, still adhered to the old Julian calendar, basically a calendar system brought in by Julius Caesar in 46 BC, where the start of the new year began on March 25th, ended on the 31st of December. And this calendar was kind of increasingly viewed as out of step with the Constant's Gregorian system, because they were using the full calendar system, and it's a lot more accurate. But the problem is they're all Catholics, and we weren't going to take any lecturings of Catholics, no sir, right? So we stuck to our own ways. The problem with kind of sticking out for it, and there's a good bit of British pluck involved in this story, but I'm not sure we come out of it all that well in the end game, is that we were so angsty about being seen to give in to the Fenian group that we decided to put up with it for 170 years. Just to like the longest huff in history, really, isn't it? Whereby gradually the Julian calendar, because Julian calendar was built on the what do you call it? That you know, the eclipse, whatever it's called. You know, when you're going around planets and stuff, that thing, yeah, sort of being round and even and predictable. But of course, it's elliptical, so consequently, it was always going to be out. But I don't think they really worried about it. It wouldn't be a problem for I don't know, another 1,500 years or something mad like that. But unfortunately, jumping forward to about 150 years or that, we got to 1751, where the calendar was so skewed and kind of out of date that the following, they did some countings of days, and the following year was going to be 282 days. So they thought, this is ridiculous. Britain was quite literally living in the past. Because, madly, they'd stuck with this old system, they were now 11 days behind the rest of Europe and the world that was using the Gregorian calendar. So you can imagine what a mess that made of trade, of contracts, or anything that had to be written down and dated, because Britain was quite literally living in the past. Which is nuts, right? So they said, right, we're going to have to do something about this. You know, and you'd think that people would kind of understand, wouldn't you? But then again, if you did, you'd not met people. And so it really stirs up, and of course there's a lot of agitators in this, the Tory party in particular, who still to this day think we should return the 11 days. I think it's in their manifesto somewhere. But it got workers really worried, because they basically said what we're going to do is we're going to have to even it out and take a chunk out of the calendar. And they're like, well, what about work, and what about wages, and what about contracts and hire, and all this, that and the other? What about my birthday? Because it disappeared. So there's a lot of hoo-ha, but eventually the parliamentarians got their way, as they're kind of wont to do, and they passed a bill that's going to propose taking 11 days from the calendar. And there's still lots of protests, but they tried to kind of brave it out a little bit by kind of, you know, giving it a sort of nice snazzy name. So I think they called it the new style, the true style. That's it. You know, to kind of make it feel sort of fab and modern, and that they weren't getting ripped off, even though of course they weren't actually going to get paid for these days. So they brought it in, and the people that went to bed on September the 2nd of 1758 in Britain woke up the next morning, and it was September the 14th, and there was now they could do about it. But an interesting little hangover from that particular story is that in order then to sort of calibrate when the end of the year should be with the not really the Christian calendar, they didn't care by this stage because they were well established, but the tax, that was what really mattered, wasn't it? When was the tax year going to fall? And people said traditionally, you know, it fell after Ladies' Day. So they had to move it 11 days. And that's why, fun fact, that the tax start year, which used to be the 26th of March up until 1752, became April the 6th. So it probably means nothing to you that anybody that's on the other side of the Atlantic, because I think you're quite sensible to have your tax year starting on the 1st of January. We, however, go with April the 6th, because it's 11 days after Ascension Day. And what better reason could there possibly be than that? But as I say, apparently there's riots and all sorts of things. People weren't at all pleased at this new turn of events, but they had to lump it, and it soon died down. But it's interesting, you know, that people were sort of really kind of fired up and got angry about stuff that really had almost no effect whatsoever on their lives. But, you know, that's kind of fake news, right? Nothing new about it. We did not invent fake news. It has been around a long time, and if people tell you these days... Oh, because some people as well, like the fire and brimstone preacher types, right? No disrespect. They were like, well, you know, this is going to be, you know, you're 11 days closer to God now. You know, whatever your allotted death day was, that hasn't been taken into consideration, so I'm going to, like, die 11 days sooner. And people get really angsty about this stuff. But, as I say, it was, of course, pure nonsense. But there we go, that's people for you. That's what happens if you involve people in decisions. Terrible. Democracy is a terrible idea. It's just, it's the least bad one we've ever had. So said Winston Churchill. There you go. Fun fact, I don't know if you knew that. So what else this time of year? So we're sailing. We've come across we're sailing. I think looking pretty Stonegate. I think we'll just stand here for a minute and just take them while I have a little drink. So as I say, because you got this sort of freezing in time really, or in Scotland, because in effect Christmas is being banned, so it stops evolving really, because it's not sort of popularly kind of celebrated, and not visible, so it becomes less uniform. But there's sort of certain things, and watch night, and again like the Welsh thing, singing was kind of important in the culture. You know, gathering sort of in and around New Year, not just on New Year's Eve, but over the sort of days sort of following, to cleanse, to enter the kind of new year with a sort of spiritual focus, which is kind of nice, isn't it? And I think a lot of us can kind of to get the essence of that and say, yeah, but that's lovely. So what we all kind of really want, isn't it, for kind of this time of year, just sort of feel refreshed, and that there's good days to come and things to look forward to, and reasons to be positive and reasons to get out of bed, and whatever. In January it's cold and dark, so for me it's going home after this. I'm watching The Traitor, so I can't be late tonight. So however long we've got, but I've got to go at 7. So what haven't we talked about? Tom Lehrer was great. Okay. Oh, he did. Yes, I do know. Isn't Tom Lehrer? Is he the guy that did the chemical elements thing as well? I think he is. Yeah, I know. He died, I think, not so long back. So yeah, so Scotland is very much kind of the Presbyterians, everything kind of driving through that. There's a lot of communal bell ringing was done in Scotland as well in the days following New Year. Vigil keeping. So you got wassailing as well, we talked about, the gift giving, bell ringing, and in England you've got these older customs that are kind of well into the 18th and 19th century, so plenty near enough for us to have really good records of stuff, and of course, by the time into the 19th century, photography and so forth, but especially in kind of rural communities. So wassailing was this kind of most well-known, and this is something that would sort of start over the kind of 12 nights, but steadily work its way upwards in intensity up towards 12th night, of kind of going from kind of door to door, wishing one another health, and door-to-door wassailing. So it's similar to caroling, but it's not Christian really. It's not Christian at all, actually. But nonetheless, the spirit of goodwill is there. There's certainly echoes of the Christian message. It's very much for goodwill to all man. People exchanging, gifts and drinking each other's health and so forth. And orchard wassailing was really popular. So like a group of them would go around from orchard to orchard in the cider regions, particularly in the southwest. And they'd sing songs to the apple trees, which is lovely, and pour cider on the roots. And this again was like part of this, replenishing the end of one year, beginning of the next. So the fruit of the crop of one year becomes, the fertilizer of the crop of the next. So you kind of got that nice sort of continuation. And they would also be known to fire guns and bang pots to frighten away evil spirits. So again, kind of ritualistic behaviours, different parts of the country. But again, a bit like, well, not a bit like, totally the same as Saturnalia. It's really rooted in prayer for a harvest kind of following year. And these kind of orchard rites would kind of get steadily, come to, not crescendo is the wrong word, is it? But would build up to the 12th night on January the 5th. So it's all about kind of New Year themes of kind of renewal, fertility, protection. And so the origin of these kind of pre-Christian nature rites, that have been sort of pagan and sort of semi-Christianised, but were held strong in the kind of English sort of farming communities. So consequently, you just got this continuation of old traditions being merged with, not people ignoring the new stuff, but perhaps just giving equal billing, should we put it that way. So in some parts, it was good to give tokens, little New Year's gifts, little coins. There's various little sort of traditions. And church just did sort of try and get in on the act, at least sort of, again, to try and re-Christianise the sense of New Year, kind of ringing bells, so, encourage people to become, kind of, gather at church and so forth, to see this kind of moment kind of marked in. So they were kind of taking the idea, but without really, there's no meaningful Christian festival to point to. So January the 1st is quite unusual, New Year rather, in that respect, insofar as that it belongs really to our pagan ancestry rather than our Christian practices. So consequently, it's got a free pass really, and so it derives its culture and its interest from a whole wide range of sources, some very historic. Oh God, it's cold. So there's others in Ireland, some interesting things, people involving banging a loaf of bread on doors of houses, chase away evil spirits. So just interesting little kind of nuggets, different time, different kind of places. But a similar kind of beliefs, you know what I mean, of the driving out of evil, the purification, the starting again, the renewal, the birth elements are just there, aren't they? To try and just keep the continuum going. So there's plenty to eat, plenty to drink for the rest of the year. It's a pretty simple set of kind of desires as people look forward to an uncertain future. You never know what a harvest is going to bring. When you're reliant on that, that's a bigger deal. So, you know, you've got all this sort of stuff really kind of feeding into what New Year is. But obviously since 1752, when we started properly on January the 1st, not January the 11th, as others would have it, but that kind of 18th century decision reinforced a tradition that's kind of very much older. So when people are coming together on New Year, often the community, reflecting on the end of the old year and ponder the new, that's that continuum, if that kind of makes sense, with something that's very much older indeed. So, you know, a lot of it's sort of Christian influenced, Christian associated, Christian veneered in some places, but mostly it is all associated with the older belief systems. Those ancient, I think it's rather nice because it really sort of connects us. It's one of the faintest echoes, but it's still a meaningful one, of those Celtic people that lived on these islands before the Romans arrived. That you know, we still, it's like their gift to us is New Year celebrations, which I think is quite lovely. So I'm going to give you a quick little sneaky peek at the shambles, just because you always get so upset if you don't get it. But we're not going to dwell in the shambles because I want to get us up to the clock. So I want to finish off and talk about Janus before we clock off in not too long. So I hope you're enjoying your, is it pre-prandial? A little earlier than that, I guess, where most of you are. But whatever you're doing this afternoon, is it? Where some of you are? I'll lose track. What are we on now? It's UK 7, so coming at 2 o'clock in New York, late morning on the West Coast. Okay, I've got my bearings. Well, I hope it's sunnier and warmer where you are, but hopefully it's atmospheric. At least it's quiet. It's always nice to see the shambles quiet, isn't it? So we can enjoy that. So let's talk for a couple of minutes about Twelfth Night, and then we'll wander back. So Twelfth Night, interesting one. It's the point where going all the way back, of course, to the medieval belief system, bringing the devil into your home. Stories tell in the Christmas tour, you know, of this belief that within the evergreens reside these evil spirits. That, you know, you deck the halls and fill your house with them, but it was a cynical ploy to get them off their guard, so that over your kind of 12 nights of celebration, 12 nights of feasting and conviviality, sitting around the fire and playing games and singing songs and doing all the kind of fun stuff people do when they used to get 12 days off at Christmas, would kind of put the devils, you know, they'd come off point, as you might say. They become relaxed, enjoy company, and get drawn into the mood of genial conviviality, and they'll be off guard. And so then 12th night, you were told to rip down your decorations, hurl them on the fire, and then when you hear the hiss, the pops, the screams, and the bangs of the burning evergreens, you'll know the devil and all his works has been destroyed. You'll have a good harvest. And we continue that, of course, by saying it's bad luck not to take them down, and that certainly goes all the way back to the medieval era. But the advice is a bit more sort of stark in the original text. It's been a bit sanitised for varieties, as you might say, insofar as that into the medieval mindset, it wasn't bad luck, it was famine and death will stalk the earth. So they were really sort of keying it into the harvest and saying this is absolutely, you know, kind of what you need to do if you are, you know, not going to starve next year. So, you know, on that basis, you probably would follow their advice, wouldn't you? So they became kind of, you know, pretty good at sticking to that. Almost 2 p.m. there. Hope you're enjoying the lights of York. And of course, 12th Night has got a religious significance, although 12th Night actually happens on January the 5th. Oh, sorry. Yeah, January the 5th. And a lot of people think it's January the 6th. And it's a moot point, insofar as a moot point, you know, means it's not universally agreed. But mostly, culturally now, we tend to, go down here, it's a bit quieter. Culturally, we would tend to count from Christmas Day, at least in Britain. But in other places it count from Boxing Day, so it depends on when it falls. But anyway, if the 12th day of Christmas, 12th night falls also then on the 6th of January, where it doesn't in this country, it does in some parts of Europe, it coincides with Epiphany, which of course is a Christian festival that marks the arrival of the wise men. Interestingly, I haven't mentioned the word kings because they aren't really called kings in the Bible, and didn't use the word three either because it doesn't count them. All we have is 3 presents We don't actually know. There's later, so there's potential. It's fascinating actually how loose the story of the Nativity actually is in the Bible, compared to the nice version that we get very kind of polished in the books. Has a lot more certainty than is actually present in the comparatively few verses that are there. Anyway, but Epiphany, of course, the celebration, the arrival of the three wise men, and again, this could have been, when Herod instructs the old boys under 2 to be killed. It just suggests that it was considerably later than his actual birth, for that not to be a mad thing. But anyway, so in this country, 12th night is the 5th. That's how we deal with it. And so it's the night before Christmas tide finishes, and then you get the Feast of Epiphany. So one finishes, another one starts. Well, not Christmas tide, but our foreshortened version of Christmas tide. It used to go until February the 3rd, I think, Christmas tide. So we've pulled that back somewhat, and agree that January the 5th now is the end of it. And Fran's on. Fran, with the Anglican Church, Epiphany, very important day. Absolutely, Fran, yeah. And another sort of start of renewal, a new beginning of the year. And then the rest of the year, isn't it? If there's old-fashioned diaries, you remember, first after Epiphany and second after Epiphany. So it was used as a counting, a marker of time. So again, just how interesting, isn't it, that whether it's faith-based or cultural-based, of things like our diaries will often give us reminders. Oh, right, look at that. And you'll see that time is this. It's one way of thinking about it. But as I say, time, obviously, if you use Jewish calendar, that's different years, isn't it? But we think of time as kind of being universal, or at least to us, that our time is everybody else's time. But of course, it's not, because we're on this revolving planet, which makes that much more complicated. And it depends what you're counting and when you start counting, and how you count, and how you use leap years, and a whole bunch of things, that we're still trying to calibrate. So I think it's interesting, but that we all, nonetheless, however we measure it and in what way we celebrate it, we're all kind of looking to mark this transition from one year to the next. It's got a very nice universal ring, particularly as the world can be so easily divided these days. It's one thing that most of us can agree is a good thing. That is not accused of being woke or anything like that, which is great. New Year's just kind of for everybody, and people will do what they will, which I think is lovely. But the one thing, of course, that historically you were encouraged to do was to make a resolution. Now, are there any of us on here that have been guilty of, while starting on the best of intentions, have perhaps in error fallen somewhat short on some of the resolutions they've made in years gone by? I know I'm certainly amongst that camp. But does anybody know how far back they go? And if anybody's sort of tuned into the kind of timings, as you might say, of this. And as we come round just past the edge of the Roman fortress, the edge of the Roman fortress where it was, just here in York, bang opposite we have a clock, which is appropriate. Talking, of course, about how time moves from one to another. And interestingly, look at the face of this chap up here. We've got one of the faces of Janus. So no, it's an 18th century clock, been much repaired ever since, clearly, but it is, sorry, thanks. Very nice, being restored, looking very clean, sparkly in the light. I'll just come over here, come out of the traffic, come out of the way. There's a lot of film people don't want to be on camera. This is, of course, the bombed out church of Martin the Grand. So the clock is relevant. The face of Janus up there is also relevant. And it is basically, sorry, I'm a bit on Zoom there, I think. Yeah. Oops. It's a kind of relevant kind of concept as sort of time ticks over, because we think of time, Old Father time, presentation, visual representation, I'm sure, wherever you're from, is something you'll recognise. It's the old man, isn't it? It's the old man carrying the scythe. Well, who else is an old man who carries a scythe? Well, it's death, isn't it? But it doesn't seem like it's the same Old Father time is a benign form of death. He's a death that is about a prelude to rebirth. He's the end of something. He's not the beginning. the beginning following it, and again on very traditional portraits, you'll find that alongside Old Father Time, the chap with the long beard, usually white or darkish robes and his scythe, will be a baby, often floating along on a bubble. And basically the baby is the new year, it's the new possibilities, it's the new unknown. Another unknown unknown, as Donny Rumsfeld would have said, right? Because nobody knows how a new year is going to pan out, right? Although that awful thing in Switzerland, terrible, terrible, terrible. My heart goes up to anybody associated with that, dreadful. Bit of bad luck of celebrating New Year, just as people have done for centuries all over the world, and that's how it ended up for them, terrible. But it goes back to the Roman time. So the Romans, at the end of their, we'll walk down here as we talk, at the end of their Saturnalia, so their winter festival, they'd really kind of cut loose. They'd done the whole Bacchanalian thing, you know, and it was kind of, you know, it was partying, it was drinking, it was orgies, it was the lot, right? Gambling, you know, the full Monties, you might say. And then they've done the Feast of Solivictus after that, the god of the unconquered sun, the god that comes through Mithras. So another 2 days celebration. Now they've had 8 days of partying, and they need to sober up for the beginning of the year. Because I say Julius Caesar was very keen that the year should be 12 months, starting January the 1st. It was never going to work, but it worked for long enough. But sort of into this, you know, you've got, as I say, then the soldiers, you know, and the Roman citizens and those living in Roman-controlled places are expected to make these pledges, if you like, do you know what I mean, as to how they're going to be better people. And because the calendar starts with January, that's named after the god called Janus. And Janus is the god who is two-faced. He literally looks into the past, okay, and he looks into the future. So he's often the god of endings and beginnings, so perfect for New Year. Also, he was often portrayed above doorways, because obviously every way out is a way in. So often Janus was kind of above doorways. And because they believed that he could see into the future and into the past, you couldn't really lie to him. So when you were making your resolutions to Janus, in effect, you were sealing the deal, not quite in blood, but certainly in intent. Because the view was that if you didn't fulfill your side of the bargain, you didn't deliver what you promised. Janus had this unique ability to look back and see. So you were likely to get busted. And the belief was that you may end up meeting Old Father Time a bit earlier than you might otherwise have wished as a result. So that was kind of best avoided. So they would make these resolutions to kind of be good Romans that had their period of kickback. Now was time to kind of become crack citizens again. This is how we took over half the world, and we're going to do it all over again. So it's that whole kind of snapping back and feeling motivated is also kind of a nice kind of Roman association to it. Roman's kind of soldiers and army. So again, just sort of takes us full circle with York, you know, a city founded by the Romans. So I do hope you've enjoyed that brief deviation, rumination, whatever it's been in relation to New Year and this kind of second period that happens after Christmas, which isn't as governed. It feels like freer in many respects by convention, or at least the kind of the Christian convention, and it is just sees us as being jolly little pagans, enjoying ourselves as everyone has done for thousands of years. So I do hope that you've enjoyed yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. I'm going home to get warm and to watch The Traitors. So from York, thank you everybody who did the super stickers and really appreciate it. Thank you Triest if you're on, and Linda if you're on. I saw your emails, haven't replied yet, but I shall do and say thank you. Thank you Leslie and everybody, and Natalie. Thank you everybody. So I'll see you very, very soon. Bye bye.